In 1940, a factory foreman named Otto Hampel and his wife Elise began leaving handwritten postcards around Berlin. They were anonymous notes of protest urging their neighbors to resist the Nazi regime. Otto would scout locations in advance, stairwells and hallways in apartment buildings, public spaces, really anywhere a postcard could be dropped and picked up and read before anyone thought to report it. He and Elise wrote each card by hand in careful block letters so their handwriting couldn't be traced. For 2 years, they moved through the city like shadows, slipping their cards into the cracks of a world that had gone entirely wrong. When they were finally caught, the Gestapo showed them the cards. Almost every single postcard had been turned into the authorities by the people who found them. 2 years of painstaking, dangerous work, hundreds of cards, and nearly zero impact. The Hampels were executed in 1943. Their story eventually inspired the famous book by Hans Fallada, Every Man Dies Alone. They did die alone, and the sacrifice they made to tell the truth never moved the needle. That experience of knowing the truth, saying it clearly at enormous personal cost, and changing nothing is incredibly isolating. We rarely talk about this soul-crushing experience because we tend to measure the value of truth by its impact. In our world, there are only 2 categories. You either won the argument or you lost it. If you didn't move the needle, we assume your effort was wasted. Parshat Shelach proposes a third option. Welcome back to Torah in 7. I'm Bela Olidort. In this week's Parsha, Moshe sends 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan. They tour it for 40 days. When they return, 10 of them deliver their report. They don't lie exactly, but they take real facts and strip them of context, creating a narrative that will most certainly produce panic. The cities are fortified, they say. The people are giants. We felt like grasshoppers. Every word is technically true. But the story is entirely false. And the crowd panics. They weep, they're scared, they don't want to go forward, they want to go back to Egypt. And in the middle of the cacophony, one man steps forward and silences the crowd. Vayahas Kalev et ha'am. How did Kalev even get the floor? Yehoshua, the other spy who refused to go along with the group, never had a chance. The crowd knew he was aligned with Moshe, so they had already tuned him out. But Kalev was different. He didn't stand against the crowd. He stood with them, waited for the peak of their rage, and caught the wave. The Talmud tells us that Kalev played a long, careful game. For 40 days he walked alongside the other spies, never once giving himself away. He knew he couldn't fight them openly. He knew that if he'd show his hand too soon, he'd be dismissed as just another establishment shill. But he also knew how difficult it would be to hold on to his truth in the din of louder voices. So in the middle of the mission, Kalev slipped away to Hebron to pray at the graves of the patriarchs. The commentaries tell us that he asked for the strength not to be swallowed by the groupthink of the men he was walking with. When the crowd began to riot, Kalev didn't defend Moshe. He stood up and shouted, "Is this all the son of Amram has done to us?" And the crowd went silent. They were certain he was joining the pylon, so they leaned in, expecting him to confirm what they already believed. And only then, when he had their undivided attention, did he say, "Did Moshe not also split the sea for us? Did he not bring down the manna? We can surely go up and possess the land." The strategy was perfect. The timing was perfect. And this is what we remember Kalev for, his ability to silence the crowd and speak the truth. He's later praised and rewarded by God for this, which is a curious thing because, in fact, Kalev had no impact at all on the crowd. The very next verse shows us a community in total meltdown. They didn't listen. They railed against Moshe and Aaron, shouting, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt." But we don't really focus much on this because God rewards Kalev. He alone among his entire generation will eventually enter the land, and we remember him as a winner. But in the moment, the text is unambiguous. Kalev lost the room. The nation was condemned to 40 years of wandering. So by every visible, immediate measure, Kalev failed. And yet, it's precisely after the people rail against him that God singles him out. God says of him, my servant Kalev, because he had a ruach acheret, a different spirit within him, he followed me fully. What is this ruach acheret? It's used only here, only once in the Torah, and only with regard to Kalev. I think it's more than courage and it's more than conviction. Kalev seemed to be operating on a different frequency entirely. He had cultivated an inner world that was no longer dependent on the validation of the people standing next to him. Kalev failed to turn the crowd, but he was a hero because the crowd failed to turn him. Before their execution, Otto and Elise Hampel realized that they not only failed to wake their neighbors, but that their neighbors had actively tried to silence them. They shared the truth. And in a world gone mad, that's what made them so profoundly alone. We live in a culture that measures truth-telling by its immediate results. And when the crowd doesn't turn, we throw up our hands. What's the point? Why bother? But that is the different spirit. It's the ability to hold your own truth intact while the loudest, most toxic narrative in the world builds around you. To lose the room and remain yourself. To speak the truth so that we don't forfeit the airwaves to the lie. That's Torah in 7 for Parshat Shelach. If you'd like to go deeper, there's a companion study guide with Hebrew terms, sources, and additional readings for further learning at torahin7.substack.com. And if you'd like to dedicate an episode in honor or memory of someone, you can do that there too. Thank you for listening, and Shabbat Shalom.